who are darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town. And let's
Give me a wave when you're ready to go on live.
true. We're just good for nothing. They all forget. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Darker Than Blue. Here we are in Washington, D.C., and if I sound exhausted and exasperated, that's because I am, and I am sure you are too. Thank you so much for joining. I am Jackie Lukman. This is Darker Than Blue, the show where we talk about politics for the people who you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. That's me and you, folks, and I'm sure today many more of us are much darker than blue. Many of us are absolutely horrified at what is going on in the world, what has transpired, what is being unleashed. So, of course, you know what I got to do. I got to talk about the history of how we got here because there are a lot of narratives about what is going on in Iran that are ahistorical, that are inaccurate, and that are just absolutely the wrong focus. So, without a whole lot of extra commentary, because you know I only have 50 minutes at this point, let's get into this. So, I've been talking about this issue with Iran ever since I've been a real journalist, I guess, when I was a co-host of By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, radio show that was on Sputnik USA. I was a co-host. Sean Blackman was the host. And, you know, we migrated from there after we were fired on October 10th for reasons that it really had nothing to do with the Russian government and had everything to do with the editor-in-chief of that place who had personal feelings. But that's my foundation in journalism. And I know that if we were still on the air, on the show right now, Sean and I would be in our bag about this topic because we've been talking about this since the first Trump administration. And there are reasons for that. So, in June 2020, as a matter of fact, on June 1st, 2020, I did a monologue on, excuse me, By Any Means Necessary. And the monologue was just me having the first 8 to 10 minutes of the show to talk about whatever I wanted to, basically. And what I wanted to talk about usually were the politics of the day and connected to the history that is not talked about in the headlines. I've always been this way, y'all. This is not new. So this is what I said about the aggressions against Iran in 2020, on June 1st, 2020, when I read this monologue that I called Western Imperialism Created the Crisis in Iraq and Iran. So I said then, despite the recent actions in the region that heightened tensions and may have brought us closer to all-out war with Iran, remember this was written in 2020, what actually created the tinderbox was created over 100 years ago when the Western imperialism of Britain carved up the Arab world, creating or controlling resource-rich nation states, having no consideration for the ethnic and religious differences between and in these regions that they exploited for their profit. For nearly 400 years prior to World War I, what we know today as Iraq was divided into three distinct semi-autonomous Shiite, Sunni, and Kurdish provinces or vilayets within the Ottoman Empire. When World War I broke out, the Ottoman Empire had lost some influence and ultimately lost the war. The British and the French, then victorious in the war, divided up the historic homeland of Arab people at the Paris Peace Conference, and they also created new nations drawn on Western imperial political and economic lines. This is where we get modern day Iraq, which was created by fusing the three distinct cultural, ethnic, and political provinces that were separated under the Ottoman Empire together now under British control. Why would they do this? For the same reason the US remains mired in the region today. Oil had been discovered in the three vilayets previously controlled by the Ottomans. The British lust for Arabian oil and their disregard of the political and ethnic divisions that had been adhered to and respected for over 400 years created the inevitable tinderbox in the new nation of Iraq, with the three groups that were previously held at a respectful distance from one another under Ottoman rule. Revolts ensued, and eventually Winston Churchill turned to T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia, to appoint one of Emir Hussein's sons, Faisal, to be king of Iraq, and another son, Abdullah, was made king of another newly created kingdom called Jordan. The British just carving up stuff like it's pie. But the ethnic divisions that were ignored in the creation of Iraq kept it destabilized, and the British were finally expelled from Iraq in the 1950s. Now, what does this have to do with Iran? Well, Iran was not a direct party to World War I, but it was a direct recipient of the fallout of tensions among the factions in the war. Iran was known as Persia at that time during World War I and was officially neutral in that war. However, it became a battleground for Russian, Turkish, and British troops. When German agents tried to provoke the southern tribes in Iran against the British, Britain created an armed force called the Southern or South Persia Rifles to protect its interests. Several battles were fought in western Iran between Russia and Ottoman forces. These battles destroyed villages, killed 700s of Iranian civilians, caused near famine conditions, and the Iranian government's inability to protect the country and the people provoked rebellions and autonomy movements in northern Iran between 1915 and 1921. At the end of World War I, Russia was preoccupied with its own revolution. They was a little bit busy. So Britain was the dominant influence in Tehran because that's all they do, really. They just carve stuff up and stick around and stay in everybody's business. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Curzon, proposed an agreement under which Britain would provide Iran with a loan to cover the cost of the damage done during the war. It was their fault that the war even, but they're gonna give Iran, a neutral nation that didn't participate in the war, a loan. So Britain made money off of the war they caused, their control of Iran, which was not involved in the war, but they made Iran pay anyway. Sound familiar? But the British also proposed to install advisors to the Iranian army and virtually to every government department in Iran. So the Iranian prime minister, excuse me, Vosuk Od Dowleh, and forgive me if I mispronounce some of these names, this time it's not intentional, and two members of his cabinet were bribed by the British to support the Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919. I hope you're writing some of these references down. The Paris Peace Conference, the Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919, which gave Britain control of Iran's army and treasury, which no one in Iran wanted. Britain's later occupation of Iran during World War II only increased the anti-British sentiment in the country, you think? That's when the British decided that Reza Shah Pahlavi, whom they had helped place in power, was no longer reliable. So they deposed him and chose his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as the new Shah. But once World War II ended, Iran elected Mohammad Mossadegh to prime minister. Now, Mossadegh had campaigned against the Anglo-Persian Agreement of 1919 and had written a book denouncing capitulation agreements under which foreigners, like Britain, were granted immunity from Iranian law, because you know they committed a bunch of crimes against Iranian people and nobody held them accountable under Iranian law, and you know they didn't care under British law. After he was elected prime minister in 1951, Mossadegh introduced a range of social and economic policies that benefited the Iranian people and asked parliament to take the unimaginable step of nationalizing Iran's oil industry to benefit the people, because the Shah nationalized to some degree Iran's oil industry, but almost all of that oil money went to developing and propping up the defense industry and Britain's and the US's internal spy infrastructure, the SAVAK, the CIA trained secret police of the Shah. So, Mossadegh, though, asked Parliament to take the step of nationalizing Iran's oil industry for real. It agreed to do it unanimously, and we know what happened after that, don't we? U.S. involvement in Iran begins with the head up to, or the lead up to the 1953 coup d'etat that ousted democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, or should I say CIA involvement in Iran begins here. What the oil nationalization had widespread popular support across Iran. At first, the British, angry that now Iran is controlling its own oil and its own oil money and benefiting the people, and that money is not going into Britain's pockets, British petroleum to be exact. At first, the British tried to oust Mossadegh by themselves without the US's help. That didn't work. They were only successful when the CIA got involved and orchestrated the coup against him in August 1953. But even the US's initial coup that they tried to get rid of Mossadegh initially failed. So the British and the US, imperialists, all of them, tried repeatedly to destroy the democratically people-focused elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran. And they finally succeeded in August of 1953. Part of this operation included the CIA paying local functionaries in Iran to engage in rioting as a diversion while military personnel positioned themselves to besiege Mossadegh. So the riots you saw televised in Iran in January of this year, prior to the bombs being dropped on them, that's the context and the precedent for those riots today. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, with the reinstatement of the Shah after the coup of Mohammad Mossadegh, and this one was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, after the coup, the U.S. essentially took control of Iran's oil industry, very much like what they're trying to do in Venezuela. And what you need to understand, they want to do everywhere there is oil or any kind of valuable resources. Ecuador, lithium. Yeah. The Shah, meanwhile, developed an expansive police state undergirded by the secret police force called the SAVAK, SAVAK. I'm spelling it so you can write it down, so you can look it up. Both the CIA and Mossad helped develop, train, and fund SAVAK. Let me say that again. Both the CIA in the US and Mossad in Israel helped develop, train, and fund SAVAK that terrorized anti-Shah and anti-West dissidents in Iran. This is the context, again, through which the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, is now cozying up to the U.S. and Israel. Yes, that guy that you saw on some of the U.S. reality TV shows. I heard this man's name and I thought, no, that can't be the same. Yes, that this Reza Shah, it's the same, from the same family. He's the one, him and his father are the ones who are like, yes, bomb Iran. Uh-huh. And the father, Reza, thinks that Trump is going to install him as the next Shah. I don't think that's going to happen because you see what Iran is doing. But anyway, when the Mossad orchestrated urban war, or the riots, began in January, it was Reza Pahlavi who cheered them on publicly and called on the US to bomb Iran. These are the people who are responsible for the violence and death that occurred in Iran during the riots in January. Those were not organic protests. We'll talk about that in a minute too. We should be clear though that they are complete opportunists, these folks who would foment this type of violence in their country. They're opportunists who are willing to hand Iran over to the US and Israel if it means they can get a fat enough check. They are happy to serve imperialism and serve their people up to it as long as they gonna get paid. So they think. For Washington, which had been supporting the Shah, it was clear that the regime had become increasingly fragile. It had to avoid a workers' revolution in the Middle East, so the US began to contact religious leaders linked to the Ayatollah Khomeini and the leaders of the National Front, with the intention that the resulting government should be pro American within the framework of the Cold War. Now, this was before the Ayatollah was the Ayatollah. This is when he was a dissident of the Shah regime in Iran. And as much as the US government goes on and on now about how much Islam is a backward religion and Iran must be destroyed because their religion is weird and backward, they were happy to see if they could recruit some of these religious leaders to get rid of the Shah that they imposed, that they were now losing control of. As long as they could guarantee that those religious leaders would be sufficiently beholden to US interests. Problem was, none of the religious dissidents in Iran at the time liked the US either. So, even as their puppet, Shah, abused people in Iran, the US government did not intercede to protect the people. They interfered instead to ensure that the next leader of Iran would give the US access to the country's oil. And they were willing to prop up an appropriately US friendly, hardline religious Muslim leader to do it. So, like I said, all this talk about how evil and backwards Islam is, and that's why the US is bombing Iran now, that's a bunch of lies. It's garbage. And they know they're lying. Now, the Shah tried to maintain calm in response to this general strike that the people of Iran waged against him after a few massacres that the Shah of Iran and his Savak, his CIA Mossad backed Savak unit, carried out against at least 5 to 10,000 Iranians. He tried to form a government of national conciliation with a series of concessions because the people were pressing him. And those concessions were freedom for political prisoners. Because you want to talk about somebody locking a bunch of people up in Iran? That was the Shah. The cutting of oil supplies to Israel. In the 50s, Iranians were angry about Israel. Right before the revolution in the 70s, the Iranians were even angrier about Israel because look at the influence that Israel had on the country. They propped up a secret police that was brutally repressing people who were opposed to imperialist monarchical rule. And then they demanded cuts to the military budget and the dissolution of SAVAK. Jimmy Carter, everybody's favorite nice guy Baptist Sunday school teacher president, sent General Robert E. Huyser, Huyser, to Iran to ensure not that the people were protected, but to ensure that the armed forces in Iran stood firmly with the Shah, while negotiations were opened with the liberal and Islamist forces. Why? Why would he do this? Because, like every US president, Carter was a virulent anti communist who hated the USSR. So he could not allow the Soviet Union to advance in the Middle East after the founding of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. A whole bunch of history right there. Don't have time to pick it all apart. That's why you're taking notes, so you can go read about it later, but it's all connected. The Shah was forced to flee Iran because of the revolution in mid-January 1971. On February 79, on February 1, 1979, Khomeini was greeted by 5 million people at Tehran airport as a liberator from colonial and imperialist domination. Now, I know that was rapid fire. That was a lot of history to get through in the first 20 minutes of this show. But let's pick this up now to a little bit of the present, because I think it's true that the fall of the Shah unleashed the political struggle over the type of leadership Iran would have. At that time, at the time of the revolution, Khomeini had not yet really consolidated his Islamic government structure, and workers organized under things called shuras, which were a form of self organization that were like the Russian Soviets. You have to look up what the word Soviet means. It's not just Russian. A Soviet is a thing. It's a specific thing. So please look that up. And they were a space, these shuras, where leftist parties and activists who had been weakened by years of persecution and exile from the Savak were able to exert some influence, that they still held control over the economy in the country. Political influence was also divided between the liberal bourgeoisie and the left, which had many sectors embrace Khomeini's anti-imperialist discourse, because even though Khomeini was a religious hardliner, as the U.S. likes to describe them, although he was just a Muslim, he was just a Muslim, and he believed in a society run by Islamic law, very much the same way that these folks in this country claim they believe that a society is best run if it's run by Christian ideals. But this society is not run by Christian ideals, because if it were, there would be no homeless people. There would be no crushing poverty. There would be no oppression of the poor. Interestingly enough, the authoritarianism and the anti-democracy and the religious theocracy of the brutal Iranian regime, as people describe it, those oil revenues go to provide for the human rights of their people. So in Iran, what it homelessness? How? Education, free, housing, heavily subsidized. The people's health care, they have universal health care, y'all. Y'all over here talking about these people like they are run by a bunch of wild, savage dogs, and they are not going bankrupt because they have a toothache. But you think you know so much about authoritarian, repressive Iran. Okay, let me get back to the script because I only have a certain amount of time. Now, one of the first demonstrations against the Islamic Republic that was establishing or consolidating itself was on March 8th, 1979. However, when the newly founded republic put forward a mandate for women to wear the hijab, right? I'm not going to say that that didn't happen. Of course it did, because it's history. And, it just did happen. Hundreds of thousands of women did take to the streets of Tehran against this measure. Also, on May Day 1979, 300,000 people gathered in the capital. Meanwhile, thousands of students refused to return to classes. So the people in Iran did not like this law, and they expressed it. The Shoras, which had achieved widespread territorial power but were localized in the industrial centers, ignored the Revolutionary Council's orders to return to work in response to the protests, and ignored Khomeini's request that the Shoras be disbanded. Now, the Shoras, though, quickly began to confront the provisional government and deepen the measures by demanding wage increases and improvements in housing, all while nationalizing several factors. However, the struggles were carried out in a fragmented manner without leading to the confluence of a large consolidated group. The political objectives of the Shoras began to collapse from their lack of organizational and ideological unity, as Khomeini formalized his political role and his influence that grew in the post revolution fractures of Iranian society. Khomeini carried out a mass maneuver. In April, he called for a referendum asking the people, do you want a monarchy going back to the Shah, or do you want an Islamic republic? 99% of the people who voted for an Islamic republic. However, a lot of the organizations boycotted the plebiscite, which showed Khomeini that he was going to have a difficult time setting up a solely religious based Islamic state. So he established that the president of Iran would be elected by popular vote and contain the administration of social rights like free education, healthcare, housing, and freedom of speech, among others, in that office. Now, here's where I think this is a good idea for us to talk about what a lot of people are talking about in regard to Iran today, and that is the rights of women in that society. And I am going to depart from my commentary here and go to an interview with Navid Farnia and Nina Farnia in a publication called Pambazuka News. You can find that online, Pambazuka News. And the name of the article is called Iran versus U.S. Imperialism, an interview with Navid Farnia and Nina Farnia. And just to let you know, I hope to have Nina Farnia on. I hope I'm going to be able to get her on next week. I was not able to get her on today, but that's why I really needed to pull this section from this interview, because this is some of the stuff that she's going to talk about. I hope if I can get her on next week. They say in this article about the current context of what's going on in Iran, quote, the protest in Iran began following a severe drop in the value of national currency, the rial, of somewhere between 30 and 40%. This was caused by sanctions and intentional currency manipulation on the part of US and European led actors, which those actors have admitted to. In fact, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced at Davos just a few weeks ago the quote economic statecraft, that's what he called it, economic statecraft policy that the U.S. deployed against Iran, which includes currency manipulation. He absolutely copped to that. He said, yes, we did that. And he was very proud of it. They go on to say in this interview, following the drop in the rial's value, merchants and shopkeepers numbering in the low thousands protested. There was an organic protest in Iran in January. Officials from the government, they say, quickly met with them and with labor unions and created a plan to address the concerns. After this resolution to the protesters' concerns, that is when the Mossad and the US launched an urban warfare campaign in major cities across Iran to distort and displace the calls made by Iranians and turn it into a regime change operation. Thousands were killed by these foreign agents with methods that are eerily familiar to those of ISIS and the Zionists, including slit throats, beheadings, etc., setting people on fire. Now, this is my aside. No US media outlet has reported this fact about the protests in Iran in January. And when I've told people this, that the government did meet with the first small group of organic protests, the riots came after that, right? But people don't believe me. They don't believe it because they're convinced that Iranians are liars. And they're convinced of that thanks to the US government, decades of lies against Iran, and the US media joining along in propagating the lies. All right, we're at 30 minutes past the hour, and you know what that means, friends. We need a station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do you have on tap for the people today? Okay, do we have a station? Oh, there we go.
DC mixtape release party, a compilation of liberation music from young artists from the DC area, based on their real stories, hometown pride, and visions for DC's future. The event happens this Saturday, March 7th at Kabu Cafe in Northeast DC. Doors open at 6 p.m. Details at Freedom Futures Connect.
Okay, coming back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Let's get back into the rest of this information. So the Farnias continue in this interview saying the gender question in Iran is significant. They don't shy away from it, and neither will I, because the Western media and pundit class largely approaches it in a decontextualized and anti-factual way. But it is important to arm ourselves with facts, with actual information. For example, the Farnias say in this article, Iranian women continue to dominate university student populations and the STEM fields. They are active throughout society at all levels. It is only after the 1979 revolution that this occurred and that literacy among women dramatically increased. So here's my little aside. The pictures that you saw pre-revolution were of Iranian women with, no head coverings, dressed in Western attire, just like the rest of us, short skirts and, high heel, all this kind of stuff, whatever. And then you see pictures after the revolution of Iranian women with the hijab, and you think that's oppression. You think that is a symbol of oppression because the Iranian women were subjected to the hijab. But here's the thing that you don't know, that the pictures don't reflect. The Iranian women in the Shah regime before the revolution had few rights. They were not active in society at every level. They were not in university the way they were after the revolution, that they were expected to be good women and stay at home and be quiet. They could be pretty, but they couldn't have any power. They could not move through society in an equal way. They were not given the right to education the way men were under the Shah. But after the 1979 revolution, all of that changed. But people focus only on the hijab law. And they do not pay attention to the social advancement and the rights that expanded for women under the Islamic Revolution. I get, you can dislike the hijab law, and women in Iran did. I told you they protested. And today, the hijab law is not enforced. Women can drive in Iran. They can choose to wear the hijab or they can choose not to wear the hijab, and the government doesn't care. Social and cultural tradition, regional practices might influence whether a woman wears a hijab in certain places or in certain regions, but that's not the government of Iran imposing and enforcing a hijab law. That's tradition, that's culture, that's religion in some cases. And I don't understand how a bunch of Christians in this place talking about Trump is the messenger of Jesus telling us to bomb Iran, but you got a problem with a bunch of religious people in another country living out their faith the way they see fit. There's a word for that. Anyway, to the extent the Farnias continue in this interview, that we want to use women's clothing as a metric of women's liberation, the government no longer enforces hijab restrictions. And I know that no matter how much people are told that, they're never going to believe that. Though I will say, and this is what Nina Farnia says, though I will say that this is a remarkably capitalist, individualistic, and frankly backward method for assessing liberation, as it recenters the capitalist gaze on the commodified female body as the primary metric. Why y'all want to take Iranian women's headscarves off so bad? What is wrong with you? You perverts? Rather than women's actual development and participation in society, Nina Farnia says, as full human beings, you're focusing on the wrong thing. They go on to say, as for the Tudeh party, Tudeh party, Tudeh, in Iran, is a Marxist-Leninist communist party founded in 1941. Historically, they acted as a pro-Soviet organization with significant influence among Iranian urban workers and intellectuals. It at one time played a major role in nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company, but was later suppressed by the Shah and the Islamic governments. However, the Farnias say that the Tudeh party lost much of its membership, influence, and power during the monarchy after experiencing severe repression from them, and its heyday was nearly a century ago, after which it was effectively replaced by more radical left forces. But this party, the Tudeh party, continued to be a relatively small political party with membership in the low thousands through the 1979 revolution and after. It came under fire from the more radical Iranian left after the revolution because it publicly supported and participated in the establishment of the Islamic Republic. That's not what they had a problem with. They had a problem with the Iranian left, had a problem with the Tudeh party privately, clandestinely seeking to destabilize the new Iranian government during the Iran-Iraq War through their attempts to organize a military insurrection, because at the time, most of the Iranian left united to defend the nation's sovereignty against the U.S. proxy's invasion. Who was the U.S. proxy? Iraq. The U.S. used Iraq to try to invade Iran to change the regime. And Iran kept Iraq in that war for 8 years. 8. Mm-hmm. The other significant political party that expressed this type of opportunism was the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which is now expressly working with the CIA and the Mossad. So when you hear these political parties being mentioned in any Western media outlet, this is who they are. They may be framed as the Iranian left, but they're not. That's why they're explaining who these parties are in the context of what's currently going on in Iran. So, lacking in modern significance, clear strategy, and political honesty, the Tudeh party is largely distrusted and dismissed in Iran today. It is notable that the fall of the Islamic Republic of Iran even though some people outside of Iran, in particularly in the Iranian diaspora, are bigging up or hyping up these parties, or mentioning them as their ideological leadership. The fall of the Republic, the Islamic Republic of Iran, will be disastrous for Iranian workers, for Iranian farmers, for women, the youth, the elderly. Syria and Libya are instructive in this regard, as is the fall of the Soviet Union, Nina Farnia says. And when you go to read the interview, she does talk about it more in depth, those other aspects of the impact of the fall of the Islamic Republic of Iran, should that happen. So sure, we can sit here and go through the history of the repressive hijab law in Iran if you want to, but since we are clear now that freeing women from the hijab is not why Iran is being bombed, since the US and Israel started this war by bombing a girls' school and killing more than 150 little Iranian girls, I'm not sure why that is the focus of anybody's conversation about Iran right now. Anybody who is obsessing over Iranian women being oppressed by head coverings, they should have the same concern for the Catholic nuns, right? I mean, I hope they do. Since they also wear headscarves, so do some denominations of Christians. Yeah, it's true. And they do so because their faith mandates it, or so they believe their faith mandates it, although there's no law forcing them to do this. Iran is exactly like that, believe it or not. The government does not force women who do not wear the hijab to wear one. However, individual regional cultural practices and traditions may play a factor in whether women choose to or not. But instead of focusing on the women being murdered by this regime and their genocidal partner, Israel, some of y'all are obsessing over headscarves. You are reducing Iranian women to what they wear and ignoring their demands to leave their government, their country, their leaders, and their traditions alone. You are erasing the plight of these women fighting to be alive right now because you don't like that they choose to dress traditionally according to their traditions. As again, for the, what is this, third or fourth time, there is no forced wearing of the hijab by the government in Iran. Religious tradition is a different thing, and I thought some of y'all in here would love that. And what some women choose for themselves in that regard is quite honestly none of your business. But these women are being bombed right now, and they're not being bombed because of their headscarves. Islamophobia and imperialism have deeply infected whatever the left is in this country. And if US leftists are relying on the pro-imperialist messaging of members of these parties in Iran and the misguided monarchists in the diaspora, they're listening to the wrong voices in Iran. Well, just like they're doing with the gender issue and focusing on the women in the Iranian diaspora who are dancing for the return of the repression of the masses under US Israeli imposed monarchy that they want. And here also is where our relationship with Iran comes into play, our relationship as in Black people, Africans. Remember the Iran hostage crisis that the US still holds over Iran's head as if it was some great evil unprovoked offense committed by Iran against the US? Well, Iranians were clear on our relationship to this country back then. On November 18th, 1979, the Washington Post reported that Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini ordered the release and immediate deportation of women and Blacks among the 70 hostages held at the American embassy in Iran since its seizure during the 79 revolution. The state radio said the militants holding the embassy had accepted Khomeini's directive to free the 10 women and blacks. President Carter, in a statement issued by the White House, welcomed the announcement that some of the Americans would be released and urged that Iranian authorities move to release the remaining hostages. Khomeini justified his clemency on the grounds this was published in the Washington Post, y'all. He said that he ordered the release of the women and black people from the embassy in Iran because, quote, Islam reserves special rights for women and that blacks for a long time have lived under oppression and pressure in America and may have been sent to Iran under duress. Now, do you remember Reagan saying anything about the black and women hostages released by Iran, or the reasons Khomeini gave for their release? Do you remember Reagan, who campaigned on Carter's weakness in being unable to resolve or force the release of the rest of the hostages, even saying much else about why those hostages remained? And really, why did Iran keep the rest of it? Because they were spies and they worked for the State Department. And Iran actually did keep, I think it was one black person, because they kind of thought he may have been a spy because he acted real spyish, right? So so the Iran hostage crisis, it even happened because the US government interfered in Iranian politics along with the British and would not let the Iranian people have the government and leadership they voted for. No, you didn't hear about this or anything the Ayatollah said about the special rights for women under Islam and the understanding of the oppression of Africans in the. No, you didn't hear about that. You were told by this government that Iran took American hostages because some crazy fundamentalist Islamic mullahs hated America for its freedom and wanted to punish the first Americans they could get their hands on. You were never told that the Iranians understood our continued struggle for liberation from oppression in this country that was closely linked to the way they were oppressed by the US Britain-backed dictator Shah. And they refused to hold individual black people who they did not suspect to be spies accountable for being for living in a country that oppresses us and them. You were never told about how Ayatollah Khomeini honored El Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, on his birthday. One such occasion was captured on video from a conference on Palestine in Iran in 2023, where Ayatollah Khamenei, the one who was just assassinated, opened his speech by honoring Malcolm on the date of his martyrdom and instructing the members of the convening to recite 2 verses from the Quran honoring the slain. Khamenei called him the leader of black Muslims in the US. Yeah. Didn't know about that, did you? And here we are still battling this weird, ahistorical, and immoral take from some black people in particular about sitting this fight against the genocide of Palestinians and the expanding imperialist Zionist war against the very existence of Iran. Here we are talking about we gonna sit this out. Well, when your kids who you sent to the military because that's the only way they can get health care and housing and tuition assistance, get deployed to Iran to fight people who have done nothing to us, but understand that we are also oppressed by the nation that oppresses them, I guess then y'all will want some thoughts and prayers and support for your troops. But that part will not be the fight of anti-imperialists like me. What I'm going to do is remind you of what Khamenei said. This country celebrates ending slavery, but does so much violence to the blacks here. That's what Ayatollah Khamenei said, that's the country those black and brown and indigenous working class and poor whites are expected to defend when they invade another country that has already been through the ringer of violent, undemocratic, capitalist driven, white supremacist, imperialist domination. How in the world can we celebrate anything or sit anything out when the world and our own communities are still under the smoking barrel of the empire's guns, being crushed daily by the boots of its foot soldiers, dragging us into another needless, bloody war over racist, imperialist, Zionist lies and capitalist greed? If we Africans sit anything out, it needs to be the continuing expansion of empire. We need to sit that out. We need to sit out continuing to support the lie of American dominance, exceptionalism, and imperialist domination through Zionist war. But too many of us are still trying to chase that bag and be like those two parties in Iran who publicly say, oh, I don't like this stuff at all, but who secretly, opportunistically support the imperialist invading, occupying enemy that wants to overturn and destabilize the peaceful sovereign nation that we are trying to establish. Oh, I guess I'm confusing our liberation struggle with the liberation struggle of the people in Iran, people in Palestine, people in Syria, Yemen, people in Sudan, Congo, Ecuador, Venezuela, Cuba, IAT. I am not interested in what anybody has to say, what their opinion is about the government of Iran, of what their opinion is about the Islamic revolution. I don't care what your opinion is about a theocracy, because honestly, y'all want a theocracy here. You all are either silent about what is being said about in the Pentagon to the soldiers, to the troops, about why this war is being fought. You've got generals in the U.S. military telling their soldiers that Donald Trump is anointed by Jesus to start this war, to light the match in the Middle East by attacking Iran in order to trigger the apocalypse to compel Jesus to come back. And you're mad at a theocracy in Iran? The Iranian government in no configuration has ideas like that about anybody. That's coming from these people here. So I don't want to hear about y'all. The Islamic. You don't know anything about Islam. You don't know anything about Iran. You don't know anything about their society. And honestly, you need to be paying a whole lot more attention to the mess that this place is. Because while the focus is obviously and rightly to some degree on Trump and the current cavalcade of crazy pants psychos in the United States government pushing this religious war, as they're calling it, against Iran. Really? This is not a religious war that they alone started. This is the foreign policy of the entire U.S. government under both parties toward Iran. Because Joe Biden had the opportunity to reverse all of the maximum pressure sanctions and actions that the first Trump administration carried out, but he didn't. Joe Biden didn't change anything. He didn't reverse one sanction. He didn't go back into the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran that Iran was adhering to, that the first Trump administration pulled out of, lying, claiming that they violated the agreement. The United Nations validated that Iran had not only, there was no evidence of them developing a nuclear weapon, but Iran itself, through fatwas, decrees issued by their own religious leaders that building a nuclear weapon is against their faith. So it was forbidden. They actually announced that at two major international nuclear conferences, and they provided that information to the United Nations. The UN knew that Iran did not have a nuclear weapon, was not developing a nuclear weapon, and was not planning to develop a nuclear weapon. But does Iran ever get the support? Did they ever get the support from the United Nations in telling the US and Israel, back off, stop lying, there's no evidence of this? Of course not. And they are silent about what the US and Israel are doing to Iran right now, just like the United Nations was pretty much ineffectual in regard to Gaza or Sudan or Congo or IAT. You see where I'm going. The issue today is that this government is carrying out a kinetic war against a country that this government has been carrying out an economic war and an ideological war against for decades. And it has done so by reinforcing its dominance and its intention to contain and control Iran by putting military bases, US military bases, in dozens of countries that all surround Iran. So now, with the history that I just gave you, little bit that it was, and the context of the current situation regarding the society in Iran and what is really done to them and who has done it, who is the real threat here? It has never been Iran. I'm out of time. Thank you so much. Please stay tuned for news views with Garland Nixon. Until next time, luta continua. The struggle absolutely continues, but if we keep telling the truth and focusing on the thing that matters, I promise you, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace.
On Sunday, March 8th, 12 a.m. until midnight, WPFW.
Thank you. Very good. Very good.
Resistance. Sisters are doing it for themselves. Our annual.
All right, folks, I'm going to give you just a wee tiny bit. Excuse me, because there was so much that I couldn't get to in this uh, um, um, in this show with this script. It was just so much, and I saw some of the silly cut. I've never quite understood why people like take time out of their day in their life. And I know that some of these folks are bots. I understand they're not actual people. Some of them are bots. But for the people who really are like the people, like y'all don't have nothing better to do. I mean, if what I have to say offends you so much, you can always just not listen. I mean, if it makes your ears bleed that much, save your ears and get the fuck off my stream. I don't understand why you bunch of sadomasochists and then you complaining about everybody else when all you have to do is turn the shit off. I don't understand. It's the weirdest thing in the world. Anyway, um, but I also think it's kind of funny because it's like, man, y'all get all crazy and frothing at the mouth over somebody who you have never met, who you probably will never meet, saying things that you already don't agree with. So what? You raising your blood pressure for what? When I'm gonna leave after I finish doing this, and I'm gonna go have a beer and have a good time. Y'all get a hobby. Anyway, I also wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the mob diplomacy that the U.S. has always had toward Iran, particularly going back to the first Trump administration, because not enough people are paying attention to the fact that this openly like warmongering, physically aggressive policy toward Iran it's not like a new thing from this particular administration. He started this. during his first administration with the maximum pressure, right? And the assassinations of Soleimani, and the scientists that I'm going to talk about right here in a second. But even with everything that Trump did in his first administration, the liberals who are talking about, "Ooh, if Kamala Harris had won," well, how come they didn't do anything about all these evil things that Trump did to Iran? But okay, so let me explain what I'm talking about. The Trump administration, the first Trump administration, and this is what I wrote in November of 2020. The Trump administration, in collusion with the Israeli government, has carried out a despicable act of murder by killing Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Fakhrizadeh was a professor of physics at Imam Hussein University in Tehran and was the former head of Iran's physics research center. His car was attacked by an unidentified group of terrorists on a road outside of Tehran. That's how he was assassinated. I don't know if you remember that happening, but again, another example of Mossad operating inside Iran. This was in 2020, y'all. Fakhrizadeh was shot in the gunfire exchange between the terrorists and his bodyguards, and he later died at the hospital. Though no group had taken responsibility for the murder, let's not act like we didn't know that this was Mossad. Just 2 weeks before, it was revealed that Trump had been peddling the idea of striking Iran in some way, asking his advisors, this was the first Trump administration, asking his advisors about a possible strike on a nuclear site in the country after the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, issued a report indicating that Iran had increased its stockpile of low-grade uranium beyond the 300-kilogram limit that was set in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that Iran agreed to in 2025. That's the JCPOA. But before you condemn Iran for violating anything, remember that Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal in 2018, although Iran was adhering to the terms and conditions of the agreement. Despite that, the Trump administration still imposed more sanctions on Iran after their withdrawal from the agreement, after the US's withdrawal from the agreement. Iran, of course, protested the move by the US, reserving their right to seek mediation through a dispute resolution mechanism written into the agreement that was designed to address other parties' concerns that signatories' commitments were not being met. It was the US that did not abide by the terms of the dispute resolution mechanism in the agreement. Still, despite what the US did, Iran still gave the other signatory nations, France, Germany, the UK, China, and Russia, weeks to pull the US into engaging the terms of the agreement for dispute resolution. And when no action was taken by the other signatory countries to correct or confront the US in any way, except for China and Russia, and they were like, look, come back to the table, then a whole 60 weeks after the US withdrew from the deal, 60 weeks, 6-0. Only then did Iran begin to increase its stockpile of low-grade uranium. Low-grade uranium. Iran was operating within their rights and according to the terms of the agreement, and was responding not only to the baseless US accusations that they were not adhering to the agreement, but to the exit of the US from it and the sanctions imposed on Iran after the US violated the terms of the JCPOA. But Iran was also responding to the other signatory countries not protecting Tehran from US sanctions. As a matter of fact, back in 2019, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Abbas Mousavi said Tehran would reverse course if, quote, more practical, mature, and complete measures were taken, end quote. They were always willing to negotiate, come back to the table if the US was willing to. But the European nations focused their efforts on getting Iran to an agreement that the US had violated while letting the US off the hook. Corporate media reported that it was Iran that had breached or violated the JCPOA, but that was a blatant and dangerous lie. And remember that in 2018, the same year that Trump pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA, I keep doing that wrong. Israel's embattled prime minister at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, held a press conference in which he displayed some of the worst PowerPoint slides I have seen in many, many years. Looked like they were put together by a 10-year-old to accuse Iran of a highly developed covert nuclear weapons program and brag about Mossad stealing binders of documents from Iran about it. Although why a modern country like Iran would store sensitive documents about a secret nuclear program in paper, in binders, like it was 1985, was a question nobody bothered to ask Netanyahu then, because nobody asks Israel questions about any of the lies they tell. And what Netanyahu was saying was absolutely a lie, as has been every lie about Iran, that they have been weeks away from building a nuclear weapon for the past 50 years. During that press conference in which Netanyahu shows these ridiculous, cartoonish PowerPoint slides, Netanyahu named Fakhrizadeh, the scientist who was assassinated, as a sort of public enemy number one for Israel. Netanyahu said about Fakhrizadeh in that press conference, quote, "Remember that name, Fakhrizadeh." In fact, the U.S. State and Treasury departments had been sanctioning Fakhrizadeh since 2008, claiming that he led the covert nuclear weapons program that everybody knew Iran did not have. And I have to go over here and peek over. I see a super chat. Thank you so much. Anonymous Grasshopper 439 cents for that $10 super chat. Thank you for the analysis and the truth. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support. Woo, there's so much more. Now, Iran has long said that it has been pursuing nuclear energy programs looking to build nuclear power plants that improve power delivery to its citizens. This makes perfect sense for other countries, including those that are signatories of the JCPOA or JCPOA or whatever the hell it's called, the nuclear deal. Who all have nuclear energy plants for energy. All of the other signatories do, I think. But for Iran, this idea of nuclear energy for civilian use, that's really a threat. Not because it actually is a threat, you see, but because the US and Israel say it's a threat. The other signatory countries to the nuclear deal say they were trying to keep Iran's nuclear weapons plans from ever materializing after they have collectively amassed more nuclear weapons than any of us really know the number of. And they intend to keep it that way. And this includes Israel, especially Israel, a country, a false state, that was sharing nuclear weapons secrets with the apartheid government of South Africa so South Africa could build the bomb, but accuses Iran of already having nuclear weapons while never admitting that Israel, have any. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons from that nuclear program in South Africa, largely thanks to the US and its covert nuclear weapons program that they were involved in with the same country. I said this in 2020, y'all. I said that there is arguably no more troublesome relationship in the world than the one this criminal, imperialist, white supremacist government here in the US has with the rogue Israeli white supremacist government. I declared then that Biden has a chance to change this evil alliance and show the world that America is truly ready to become the leader that it aspires to be by getting tough with Israel. I said then in 2020 that Biden needed to stop the economic and military aid and apply sanctions on Israel for its continued violations of UN human rights standards toward Palestinians and other people in the region, and for its murderous foreign policies against sovereign states. I said then that Biden could also lift all sanctions against Iran and cease the demonization of the nation's right to self-determination among a world full of nuclear superpowers led by some of the most Islamophobic and egomaniacal leaders, and reinstate the JCPOA and ensure that the U.S. adheres to it. And I said then, but Biden won't do these things. I said Biden won't do these things because doing so would signal that the US and Israel's policies and aggression toward Iran were always wrong. Islamophobic, warmongering, white supremacists, imperialist Zionists can never admit that they're wrong. If we want to pin where this country is on one politician or one administration, I would ask you to consider the power Biden Harris had to stop this from happening, because they could have if they'd wanted to, but they didn't, because none of them want to spare Iran. They all want Iran destroyed. All of them. I can confidently say this without a hint of hyperbole because Washington and the world has known that Iran does not have nuclear weapons and is not trying to build them, but they keep bombing those people and lying about them being 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. In January 2025, excuse me, it was reported that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the one who was just assassinated, has forbidden again, issued another. This was a new fatwa, but this was when it was reported. They reported that he renewed the original fatwa from his predecessor, but he issued a new fatwa forbidding the development of nuclear weapons. And this was announced by the head of armed forces judiciary in Iran a day after Donald Trump's second inauguration, just in 2025. This statement was made to try to keep Washington from continuing the sanctions and aggression toward the country that was deepened under the first Trump administration's maximum pressure scheme, which was then continued under Biden. At that time, Iran's deputy foreign minister for international and legal affairs said Tehran is ready to engage in talks if other parties are, meaning the United States. This was said after Trump's speech, in which he referenced the increase in Iran's oil revenue under the Biden administration, which alerted Iranian officials that Trump was going to continue the escalated aggression toward the country from previous administrations. Rafael Grossi, the chief of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, seeing the same thing, responded in a different way. He urged Tehran to reach an understanding with the Trump administration over its nuclear program, warning of escalating tensions in the Middle East. Not everyone in Iran wanted to appease Washington, though, because that's what that mess was. Because before Trump's reelection in November 2024, 39 Iranian lawmakers called on the Supreme National Security Council to review Iran's defense doctrine and consider adopting nuclear weapons. However, less than 2 weeks before Trump's inauguration, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, sorry about that, Pezeshkian, I'm trying, said during a meeting with Britain's ambassador that, quote, the Islamic Republic has absolutely no intention of utilizing its nuclear capabilities for military purposes based on its ideological beliefs and a fatwa by Supreme Leader Al Khamenei. End quote. They said it again for the God knows how manyth time. Everyone in the world who needed to know knew that Iran's government has consistently maintained that it will not pursue nuclear weapons, citing a fatwa or religious edict by Supreme Leader Al Khamenei banning all weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear arms. And that was a fatwa issued, reinforcing the original fatwa issued by Ayatollah Khomeini. And world leaders have known this for years because Iranian officials first referenced Khamenei's fatwa at an IAEA meeting in Vienna in August 2005 and reiterated it at the International Conference on Nuclear Disarmament in April 2010, 5 years later. According to Khamenei's official website, Iran's mission later pledged to submit a translation of the fatwa in several languages to the United Nations for registration as an official document, and they did. In an October 2019 speech, Khamenei said that building and maintaining nuclear weapons is, quote, absolutely haram, end quote, meaning strictly forbidden under Islamic law. So all the world leaders knew. They knew this all along and kept allowing the US and Israel to lie and bomb Iran and assassinate its military and government officials repeatedly. However, the same people who accuse Iran of building a nuclear weapon, despite knowing what they have repeatedly said and shown, because the United Nations has admitted that there is no evidence that Iran was anywhere near the ability to build a nuke, they don't have one, said that the fatwa they ignore was intended to mislead the international community about the true intentions of a nuclear program that Tehran insists is peaceful. Imagine that. All of the nuclear superpowers in the world. Well, I shouldn't say all. The most problematic, the US and Israel, and their allies, NATO members, with the exception of Russia, China, and maybe a few other countries that have nuclear weapons, and I mean, probably can count them on one hand, every country knew. They all knew what the Iranian leaders said about their pursuit of nuclear energy for civilian use. They knew about the fatwa, the prohibition based on Islamic law against building nuclear weapons. They had the official documentation, the official declaration of the fatwas given to them by the Iranian government. And all of these leaders sat around and continued to allow the US and Israel lie about Iran secretly building a nuclear weapon and letting them bomb the shit out of those people and kill their officials without ever once defending that government and those people. And I mean to include the United Nations in that condemnation. Because the way Iran has been treated by the United Nations, is one of the many reasons that the United Nations just does not get enough smoke for me. They have enabled the US and Israel to sanction, terrorize, bomb, and now about to allow them to recolonize the world. Where's their legitimacy, the United Nations? What use are they to humanity at this point? And while many are thinking that Trump did this, so he has to go right now, although honestly, I don't see anybody doing a damn thing to make that happen. So I don't know why people keep declaring something that needs to be done that nobody has any idea or any inkling on how to actually accomplish. Because the people who are running around with these Trump must go now signs, they ain't in nobody's organization to organize on how to do shit. So, okay, Trump must go now. Who's going to do it? How you going to do it? Who are you working with to make it happen? Where's he gonna go? And and if you can get rid of him, what you gonna do with all of his acolytes? Everybody, what you gonna do? And then once you get rid of them, if you get rid of them, what you gonna do with the liberals? Because because Trump exists because they facilitated all of the ideological and legislative infrastructure for him to pick it up and build on it. See what I mean? So you can't vote your way out of this. We can't vote our way out of this, folks, because Democrats are not opposed to the destruction of Iran. As you just saw with them not passing the war powers resolution to stop Trump from, but you see, because enough Democrats voted to give Trump, to continue to give him the power to bomb Iran without a declaration of war. Come on now. Lest we forget, Hillary Clinton declared that she wanted Iran to know that if she were elected president, she would bomb them into oblivion with her characteristic Miss Ann attitude. You remember that? And this isn't vindication for Kamala Harris either. All of the Kamala stands, the diehard apologists for Kamala Harris, the Kamala the Cop Harris, right now going nuts on social media with the memes and the posts, blaming the left for not voting for her. They argue that if she had won, this would not be happening. The problem is that Harris has never expressed a different opinion about Iran than the rest of the Washington establishment that has always wanted to destroy that country for Israel and oil. And as we have seen, with the recent failed war powers vote, the majority of Democrats are only opposed to Trump not getting their approval to bomb Iran with Israel because many of them voted not to limit Trump's ability to carry on the illegal war. But I think somebody else explains this better than I do. In an opinion piece written for News One called No, the War with Iran Didn't Happen Because Kamala Harris Lost, that was published just today, Dr. Stacy Patton writes this, quote, if the war results from a single election or from a single candidate being ignored, then the structural forces disappear. Those forces include decades of bipartisan consensus in Washington about Iran, long-standing military alliances in the region, and strategic doctrines carried forward by both Democratic and Republican administrations. Blaming voters for ignoring a warning is easier than grappling with how American power actually operates in the world. Memes turn a sprawling geopolitical crisis into a tidy morality play. Somebody warned you, you didn't listen, and now we're paying the price. But wars do not erupt because a politician mentioned Iran in a debate. This conflict with Iran, Dr. Patton says in this article, sits at the end of a much longer fuse: decades of sanctions, covert operations, proxy wars, regime change schemes, arms deals, intelligence partnerships, and U.S. military infrastructure spread across the Middle East, much of it surrounding Iran. Republicans helped build that infrastructure. Democrats maintained it, Dr. Patton writes. Each administration inherited the machinery and kept the gears turning. Kamala Harris was part of that system, not outside of it. As vice president, Dr. Patton writes, she, Kamala Harris, served in an administration that continued many of the core pillars of U.S. policy toward Iran and the broader Middle East, maintaining sweeping sanctions, sustaining military alliances across the region, reinforcing the strategic partnership with Israel, and supporting the network of U.S. bases and security agreements that project American power across the Persian Gulf. When Harris spoke about Iran as a dangerous adversary, she did say that, she was not introducing a new doctrine. She was articulating the position that has defined Washington's approach for decades. During the 2024 campaign, Dr. Patton says, Harris's rhetoric reflected that same consensus. Harris repeatedly described Iran as a major threat and emphasized that the United States would remain firmly aligned with Israel's right to defend itself. That language fits squarely within the bipartisan framework that has governed U.S. policy in the region long before she entered national politics. None of this makes Harris uniquely responsible for the current crisis in the Middle East, but it does complicate the fantasy circulating online that she represented some kind of radical break from the system producing these conflicts. Like every national political figure operating within Washington's foreign policy establishment, Dr. Patton writes, Harris moved inside a set of assumptions about American power that both parties have largely shared: that the United States must dominate the region militarily, contain Iran through sanctions and pressure a security order, and preserve a security order built around American alliances and weapons. This is the machinery all the memes leave out. End quote. You can find that article on News One, by the way. It's a fantastic read. I suggest you go read it. And the memes also leave out all the U.S. military bases established in the countries surrounding Iran that they are bombing right now. The bases. Iran is bombing the U.S. military bases in the countries that surround them. They're not bombing the countries. They're not. They're bombing the U.S. military infrastructure. And they have been doing that because the origin of the missiles and the bombs and the drones and the spies that have been thrown at Iran in the past and that are being dropped on them right now are coming from those bases. That is what Iran is striking back at. Not schools, not hospitals, not apartment buildings, not cultural or heritage sites, not historical sites, not like the US and Israel are targeting in Iran. No, Iran is bombing the sites that the terror campaigns of the imperialists and Zionists are delivered through, at least with the physical weapons that destroy buildings, communities, and bodies. And they are doing everything they can to declare their right to exist, because Iran has a right to exist, and their right to resist and defend themselves by destroying the machinery of imperialist death and Zionist occupation and genocide, which is what they want, that surrounds and targets them. Iran has a right to defend itself. But the ideological and political base of operations for the entire imperialist Zionist master plan to bring Iran to heel under the boot of the US Israel empire lies right here in the United States, in Washington, D.C. Iran is not going to attack here because they do. They do far more to avoid the destruction of innocent civilian life as they can than certainly this place in Israel do. So, no, Iran is not going to bomb the US. I don't think they're going to do that. The destruction of this empire is our job. So, we shouldn't even want them to. We should not want anybody else to take care of the trash that we have to take out in our house. That's our job. We have been majoring in the minors of other countries' business and paying too little attention to organizing ourselves against this imperialist Zionist state that exists to subjugate the world and profit from it. Iran is fighting not just for its life, but for Palestine's, Syria's, Yemen's, and the lives of every anti imperialist person, organization, and state, not just in that region. Iran is the cornerstone of the axis of resistance against imperialism and Zionism, so she must not fall. Our job is not to unscarve Iranian women to satisfy our idea of what individual women's freedom is. No, our job is to fight this system from the inside so all of us can live free to choose for ourselves what we want. That's our job. Not a damn thing less, and certainly nothing more. So, thank you so much for watching, for listening. Thank you for your patience and your understanding. Oh, this is a difficult time. This is an incredibly stressful time for all of us, but it is particularly difficult for, I think, anti imperialists. Because I would tell you that realizing that so many people who call themselves left have more smoke for the hijab than they do for imperialist carpet bombing mass murder to carry out regime change, through which girls, little girls, and women are targeted with bombs. That has been the focus of too many folks on the left and their hatred for all religions. So they're celebrating the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei. And because they are spending all this time fighting about why the government in Iran is a repressive authoritarian government, just like the US empire and their Zionist lapdogs say, despite what Iran itself says about itself, despite the fact that the people love their country and they have shown over and over again that regardless of what the internal contradictions are in the country, that country is theirs and nobody else has the right to come in and tell them what they are going to do. Every single one of them will fight you if you try. History has shown that. Ask the Iraqis if they ever want to tell the Iranians what to do again. Ask the Iraqis if they ever want to be a proxy for the US again. The Kurdish, whatever issue they have, they should think twice about being used by the US. Because you see what the US did to Iraq. After the US was done using Iraq to try to destroy Iran, couldn't do it. And you see what the US did to Iraq. Ukraine should take note too, because that's their future as well. But folks on the left in this country have been hyper focused on how much they hate the Iranian government that they know very little about, to the point that they have not talked enough about the fact that Iran, as a sovereign nation, has a right to exist, and Iran, as a sovereign people, have a right to defend themselves and choose for themselves what kind of government and system and society they want. Our only job as anti imperialists who do not live in Iran, who are not Iranian, our only job is to stop this imperialist government from getting in their way. Our job is to stop imperialism from destroying them. That's our job. We need to stop focusing on our personal bullshit and do our damn job. Because if Iran falls, we all do. And you know that's true. So, thanks for watching. Appreciate you. Oh, thank you so much. African period. Oh gosh, what y'all in these names? African period dash IC3H. I don't know, but thank you for the $20. Thank you for the ongoing political education, my sister. Long live the Iranian Revolution. Absolutely. And thank you for the $20 super chat. I appreciate you. Listen, no revolution is perfect. No country is perfect. No society is perfect. There are contradictions in every single society that exists on this planet. Yes, even the revolutionary ones. Yes. Yeah. The contradictions don't exist because of politics. The contradictions exist because of people. Because human beings are complicated and a little bit complex. And you know, when you are implementing lofty ideals in a diverse society of people who have different opinions, different needs, different perspectives, things look a lot different in real life than they do on paper. And revolutionary governments have figured this out. So this is one of the reasons why revolution continues to be a process. It's not something that you just do and you leave it and it's done. No, revolution is a process because people are projects in process, I guess. So sure, there are contradictions in every society. And the people in those societies are responsible for working those contradictions out. Nobody outside of those societies has any right to come in uninvited and impose their solutions on another group of people. I mean, you wouldn't like it if you were washing the dishes in your house and I walk by and I see the way you're washing your dishes. I don't like it because that's not the way I wash my dishes. So I'm going to break into your house and bring all of my dishwashing practices into your house and tell you at the point of a gun, you're going to wash these dishes the way I say so because this is the way it's done. And anyway, and then on top of that, you're going to pay me. You're going to pay me for the honor of having to come in here and tell you how to do it right. That's what the British and the US have done to Iran and so many other countries. Don't be like that. Don't be a fucking imperialist with your so-called solidarity. That's how some of y'all sound. You sound just like the state. This deflection sounds just like the arguments about condemning Hamas. Oh, you can't condemn the genocide unless you condemn Hamas first, so Israel doesn't come after you. Never going to condemn freedom fighters. I will not condemn a resistance movement, and I don't care if I don't agree with their in some of their internal politics or some of the way they do things or the way their government is. That's not my business. If they are fighting against the imperialism that comes from the government in the country I live in, my job, my focus, the thing that is my problem is this government and the way it is fucking with people in another country who do not want them involved in their business. That is my job. That's my business. not what another country tells the women in their country what they can or cannot or should not wear, especially when the women in that country are struggling with their government to address that issue. And they've actually made a lot of progress, but we won't even give the women in that country credit for that. We're still sitting here harping on, oh, it's a repressive government because of the hijab, and the hijab is not even a requirement in the country any longer. Why? Because the women in Iran struggled with their government to make it not a requirement. And in that way, they have a better government than we do because, again, when was the last time the government in this country listened to any of us and gave us what we said we needed to feel respected and treated like citizens in this place? Get out of here, y'all. No war on Iran. Hands off Iran. Iran must not fall. Iran has a right to exist. Iran has a right to defend itself. I stand with Iran. Period.